In 1964, in June, when I was one of the young lawyers working on the Warren Commission staff, I accompanied Chief Justice Warren to Dallas, Texas, where he was to take the deposition of Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby had just been tried and convicted of murder in the first degree of Lee Harvey Oswald. And the commission wanted to find out what went on. Was Ruby involved with Oswald? Was Ruby hired by the mob? To keep Oswald quiet, what were the facts? And when the two men met, as I told the Saudi ambassador, they shook hands. Warren extended his hand so that the Chief Justice would shake hands with a convicted murderer. Then in the course of the deposition, Joe Tannehill, Ruby's lawyer, handed Gerald Ford a note. Ford was then in the House of Representatives and was a member of the commission. And Ruby saw the note change hands and jumped up and said, "I want that." And Gerald Ford, future President of the United States, meekly stood up, walked over, and handed Ruby the note. And Ruby opened up the note. He couldn't read it. His eyesight was bad. So I saw Chief Justice Earl Warren stand up, take off his glasses, hand him to the convicted murderer. Ruby puts on his glasses, and he reads the note. So there you have the Chief Justice of the United States not only shaking hands with a convicted murderer, but sharing his glasses. Very personal matter to take off your glasses and give them to somebody else. And the Saudi ambassador said to me, "I get the point, Senator." And I said, "Well, will you pass that story on to the foreign minister?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Promise?" He said, "Yes." Well, I'm going to follow up on him to see that it is done. In case you want to know what the note said, I don't see any questions coming, but in case you want to know what the note said, passed by Tannehill, Ruby's lawyer, to Gerald Ford, it said, "You see, I told you, he's crazy." If we can persuade people on the international level to talk to one another, to be civil, we can make some progress. What we have to do at the start, however, is change some of our own policies. Secretary of Defense Gates said that U.S. foreign policy is arrogant. I think that's an understatement. On my foreign travels, and they published some incriminating pictures, there I am with Castro and Saddam Hussein and Hafez al-Assad and most of the thugs of the world. But I believe that's what you have to do. Moshe Dayan said, "You make friends with your enemies. You make peace with your enemies, not with your friends. Keep your friends close. Keep your friends close, and keep your enemies closer." When the Deputy Secretary of State, John Negroponte, testified before the Appropriations Committee a few weeks ago, I said to him, "Why don't you have bilateral talks with Iran like you did with North Korea? Why don't you talk to the Iranians?" We have since known that perhaps Iran does not have a program for developing nuclear weapons. I wouldn't accept that at face value. I'd want to pursue that issue. I wouldn't rely on that. But why don't you talk to them bilaterally? And the Deputy Secretary of State said, "Senator, well, we will if Iran agrees to stop enriching uranium and if Iran agrees to conditions A, B, C, D, and E." And I said, "Well, Mr. Secretary, how can you expect somebody to agree in advance to all of your demands as a condition to talking to them? Don't you have to have a conversation?" And I was pleased to see this week that President Bush has sent a letter to the chairman of the North Korean government, Kim Il-sung. And he addresses it, "Dear Mr. Chairman." That's fairly friendly. Kim Il-sung might not know that everything is addressed, "Dear so-and-so." And he says, if you live up to your, President Bush in the letter, if you live up to your commitments on the nuclear issue, we'd be willing to normalize relationships with you. And it may be that the president now says he's willing to go to the Mideast, taking a lead in the discussions there, willing to write to the North Koreans that in the context where there are major problems on the domestic scene, that devoting himself to those issues in the final year of his administration could be very productive. One of the worst dictators in the world is a man named Muammar Gaddafi. I'm glad that my chief of staff didn't have the current pictures that Joan and I took with Gaddafi last summer. But there is a man who was the world's worst terrorist in very heavy competition. He had blown up Pan Am 103. He had bombed a Berlin discotheque, killing American soldiers. He was developing a nuclear weapon, and then he had a change of heart. He decided he wanted to be readmitted to the family of nations, and he paid reparations to the people who were killed in 103 and the American soldiers' families, gave up the enrichment of uranium and developing a nuclear weapon, and is trying to come back into the family of nations. Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and then negotiated with the Soviets and had very meaningful arms reduction talks. Nixon dealt with China. So those problems are not intractable. They are not intractable if we are prepared to talk to people in a civil and courteous way. As I see it, the importance of courtesy and civility is critical at all levels. International negotiations, national, state, and local government. And I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that this weekend is exactly the kind of time when we should all reflect on how much we have in common and how much harder we should try to get along. In this room right now, there likely are dozens of young men and women with the brains and energy to lead our state and nation through the breadth of this century. But will we have the discipline and restraint to get along with each to do the other people's business? If you can lift a glass together with your colleague from across the aisle on a Saturday night here in New York, you can lift your pen with that same colleague across the hall on Monday morning in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, or any place in our state. Moderation in the pursuit of virtue is the approach which must be extended to our county courthouses, to Harrisburg, to Washington, and beyond to international conferences. This is the approach, I suggest, that will ensure that when you in the future have a gold medalist stand in my place on this distinguished podium before this distinguished Pennsylvania society, when you have a future gold medalist stand here on a second Saturday in December, you can declare as I do, he or she can declare as I do tonight, that we live in the greatest country in the history of the world. Thank you.